most of the viewers in Alberta will understand that Alberta and Saskatchewan are the major oil producers in Canada. And as such, they only have one customer, and that's the pipeline going down to the US. They may also, if they're following this story, understand that the expansion of that pipeline was canceled by Joe Biden after the construction had already begun and after the Alberta government had invested billions of dollars to see this project go forward. What our listeners may have forgotten is that the NDP had put offers in to lease thousands of oil tankers in order to circumvent the issues with respect to building pipelines in Canada. And our federal government actually had to buy a pipeline and cost them billions of dollars in cost overruns in order to move a pipeline to British Columbia. The Premier, Smith, believes that if she puts the investment, and we're talking tens of millions of dollars, into a study, it will force the Canadian government to consider building a pipeline from Alberta through to BC. Do you have any
When
thoughts on that, Corey?
Notley was premier, we also got $0 for our oil for a period of time because the price of oil was set by the U.S. companies buying it, and it hurt the economics of the government, which forced pressures on policies such that it allowed the next government, a conservative government, to replace Notley because the oil industry backed the government and showed that the NDP couldn't manage the oil resources. But it wasn't necessarily Notley's fault. It was the over control we have allowed of foreign interest in our oil and gas industry. So what happens now is that Smith is playing propaganda media to pressure a pipeline headed south to Texas again. She's saying, well, if you won't allow a pipeline to go through to the ocean, the only investors we have want the pipelines going to Texas because there's no private investors willing to build pipelines east or west within our continental structure to facilitate revenues and profits across Canada. And that becomes a problem when you have a premier promoting a hidden agenda to enrich the people that allow her to stay in power in Alberta and to fuel the divide between Canada and Alberta and the West to look at separation. The real issues, like Ebby said, is he wants it a privately owned pipeline to go into BC. Well, that's necessarily not advantageous either. And then he further states that if a pipeline goes through, he's going to continue to do on a world stage that this pipeline and tanker traffic is hurting and killing the environment in BC, and he's going to try to make it a big hoopera politically so that the environmentalists get on board and protest and raise the cost of building the pipeline if it goes ahead, which is undermining and circumventing the national interest when you have premiers with divergent interests that are definitely going to hurt Canada overall. What's your take on that?
Well, it's a complex problem, obviously, because the people that live in the area don't want the progress to go through, but they also complain that they have nothing to do there. There's no economic activity. BC, of course, doesn't want any development that doesn't enrich BC, and they have their own oil and gas that they're trying to get out through Alberta and down through the major pipelines. They would actually be would benefit from this as well. The other
Right.
issue is the Canadian coastline on the west coast is rather pristine at the moment, and there's a large possibility that an oil spill could ruin hundreds of miles of coastline, as it did in the Valdez spill in Alaska. Now,
Now, most of that Valdez has been cleaned up and the environmental impact has been mitigated at this stage, which shows that environmental catastrophes with oil do clean up eventually and have mitigated effect on the local and far-reaching environment, which we can point back to the largest oil spill in probably North America, which was in the mid 1800s at Petrolia Oil City there in Ontario, close to you, and that filled the whole Great Lakes with oil, and we still have fish and wildlife in the Great Lakes. It didn't kill anything, and they're growing crops and food that you're eating right off the land that was polluted. So we have to remember that we do have historical documentation of the impact of these catastrophes. They're bad for the initial start, but over time the environment cleans them up with mitigated impact. Not saying that that's not something we should prepare for, but it's something we have to consider. Like with the tar sand, the rivers run right through the tar sands and annually ship all sorts of bitumen downstream. When the tailing ponds flood, it also goes into the river system and ships it out to Ottawa. All shit and pollution flows in the river systems or in the air to the east in Alberta. So what we do here affects the whole of the country. And that's something that we have to take seriously and consider more in our political maneuvers. BC is right, it does impact the environment, but rail cars is another option that was investigated and is viable since we have a fairly good, robust rail yard system in Canada to ship coast to coast on rail. That was undermined by foreign influences in our political government here in Alberta to stop that, because it would have benefited Canada and it would have got more price for our oil, which means higher royalties for Alberta, as you pointed out. From a political standpoint, we have to look at a classic example, Norway. What did Norway do to make themselves an economic powerhouse off of tax revenue and royalty revenue generated from their oil industry? They produced a half the amount of oil that Alberta produces, and yet they have huge funds, wealth funds, and the citizens of their country benefit economically. That doesn't happen in Alberta. The only people benefiting from our oil are the rich, the wealthy, foreign interests, and the conservative government that has been in power for 50 plus years, 60 years. So that's a problem, folks. We're seeing all these profits leave, and guess what? We're stuck with the cleanup bill. We've got hundreds of billions in cleanup that we, the taxpayer, are going to have to pay for. So the whole way we look at the oil industry has to change, and that now is the time for change. And we have the ability to change. Do you have some understandings of that, Cal?
Well, again, oil is such a contentious discussion. People say there's clean oil, there's dirty oil, there's political oil, there's all kinds of issues behind oil and gas. And one of the big issues in Alberta is oil and gas has been established there for, a century. And right now it's the big American companies that control pretty much everything in the oil patch. It creates the highest paying jobs pretty much in Canada, even if they're seasonal, a lot of the cases. The fact of the matter is, currently, oil is a very valuable commodity the rest of the world wants. And the reality is, Alberta is not on a coast. So either Canada has to give up on the concept that it's going to be a major producer of oil and gas, or it's going to have to come to some kind of resolution with respect to a pipeline. Pipelines are by far the safest way to transport oil. It's safer than tanker, it's safer than rail. The difference is, of course, can it be made safe? And is the will of the few more important than the needs of the many? In other words, as I said before, we have a petrodollar. If we only have one customer, we're locked in.
Well, I made a proposal to Carney and his ministers that we should be looking at refining oil here in Canada and shipping refined goods all around the world, which mitigates the damage to the environment. Raw material is more hazardous than refined material. And if you're an environmentalist, you should be on board with this because we can produce less, we can cut our production in half, refine, and make double the profits or more. So we also get better quality jobs. We don't have a boom and bust economy in the oil patch, which is a current problem in Alberta and Western Canada. Jobs are very seasonal and it depends on the price of oil. But when you're refining, it's a different game. It's consumption. And foreign companies don't want us to refine here in Canada on large scale. And the reason is they like to take the bump in the profits where their oil refineries are, usually in the US. And we have some oil refineries out east that get their oil from cheaper sources than paying for Canadian oil from Western Canada. And that should stop. They're even subsidized, is my understanding, for such. And the oil and gas industry does get a lot of subsidies to proceed and convince the wealthy people to rip us off even more, which is stupid because there's a lot of profit in oil and gas. All you have to do is look at the Norway model and you understand where we're getting ripped off. Norway taxes their companies 78% on their profits. We don't do that. That's why they're so wealthy. They also have a state-owned oil company that they do allow private investment into, but they also regulate how the products are marketed and what the price of the product is going to be. We don't do that. Alberta got screwed with the NDP because foreign entities set the price of our oil to zero, saying, oh, well, we can't take any of your oil in the pipeline, it's too full, so we'll just give you zero for the oil that's in the pipeline. That is wrong, folks. We need federal government to step in. The federal government has to regulate the price we're getting paid for our oil. When we're being ripped off by foreign investors, getting paid less for our oil than fair market value, and we can compare our oil. They say, oh, Edmonton Select, Western Select is a lower grade oil than and should be less than West Texas. Yes, it should be. But there are comparative oils around the world, Mexican heavy and Venezuela heavy oil, and they make more than we do. And they have to pay shipping costs and what have you as well as us. So it's not a fair price we're getting for our oil. And what that means, folks, is the royalty is based off of the price as well. What do we make off the oil? And that becomes an issue. If there's a wellhead price on oil that comes out and we get a royalty based on volume, that's a different matter. We make a lot more money. And that's where the federal government has to step in. And the federal government has to step in saying any oil or gas going across a provincial border is now subject to federal government, because the federal government has to pay the environmental costs or damages by that oil leaving the province that it's produced in. If it's produced in a province, refined in a province, then it's the province's responsibility as well as the federal government to deal with any environmental cleanup, damages, or future problems. We know that there's a lot of contaminants in oil and gas, and as you have to refine or produce less quality reserves, you're picking up a lot more contaminants. There's a lot more wastewater, salt water, benzene, all these contaminants that can be in the production end of the oil, and they have to be disposed of safely, can cause health problems to people if they're not done so. So it can become a nightmare for the federal government 50 years from now. So we have to plan ahead, folks. In so doing, I say that, we need to build crown corporations that are built off the model of Norway and start preparing for the future when we need to have lower taxes and more services for an increasing population versus having to burden the taxpayer with higher tax bill to pay for damages and cleanup for the wealth that's left the country. I could go on for a lot, but I guess I should let you explain your position on that.
Well, I keep hearing, for example, that, this pipeline route has not been studied. And I know for a fact it's been studied for the last 50 years. Now,
Yeah,
whether or not those studies need to be upgraded, obviously things change. Global warming is going to have an effect, that sort of thing. But the problem that Smith is trying to set up is she knows BC has said no way. They're not going to allow
yes,
give their consent to this happening. Now, you may remember that Smith is traveling the province of Alberta right now doing a dog and pony show where she's trying to psych up people to separate.
yeah,
And her concept is that if Alberta separated, it would be richer, which, is or may not be the truth. But what she's not telling people is if Alberta separated, how would it get its oil out anyways?
it's going to
Uh,
Texas, and Texas is underpaying us, and foreign ownership means we're not going to make money here, folks. We're already almost a have-not province because of the subsidies and free giveaway of our oil. And folks, if you do the math, it's pretty simple math. Compare us to Norway and see how much we don't have. And we don't have a lot for our oil. And we do have the bill. We have hundreds of billions in cleanup bills, and we get undervalue for our oil. So the government in Alberta is the problem, and the people in Alberta are the problem because they are gaslit and don't understand the oil and gas industry and how it should have been maintained. I mean, Peter Lougheed sold Crown Corporation that built pipeline, and we made money off the transmission of the oil and gas leaving the province. Right now, it's $10 to $18 a barrel of oil for transmission costs. Those profits would have went to lower your tax dollars and has cost us trillions of dollars since 1979 selling of that asset. And private sector does not run pipelines better than public can because very simple economics. If you short the supply in a pipeline, you can charge more for transmission and you can offer less for the oil to go into an oversupplied pipeline. And that means you're going to have to bump a barrel of oil to get a barrel of oil in. So if you lower your barrel cost by 50%, your oil's going in. That's not a good business model for the province or the government. It's a great business model for the businesses owning the pipelines and owning the oil because they can pay less on taxes here in Canada, ship cheaper product to their oil refineries, and take huge profits at our loss. And it is our loss. And you got to realize that before you start selling out Canada and the province. And Smith doesn't want you to know this. And really, honestly, I don't think Smith knows much about oil and gas. Very few politicians do. I doubt like Hal Carney knows as much as he should know about the oil and gas industry, or he would have contacted me on the proposals I put before him and the government to have Crown-owned corporations to lower your tax dollar. It's all about lowering your tax dollars. And Crown corporations work. That's why private business wanted to buy them from the government for a song, is because they get to make huge profits at your loss. And Norway is the model. So let's get our heads out of our ass and start looking at Norway and what they're doing right and quit telling me, oh, capitalists are the only way to go. Capitalists mean that the wealthy are the only ones going to tell you how the money is going to be generated and what you get for a job. And guess what, folks? All the profits go to them and you get sweet tweet except the bill. And we do get the bills. So,
but Corey, did you consider that there's a mail strike? So perhaps your letter didn't get to Carney's desk.
Yeah, I didn't mail it.
Sure.
I put it in a email, modern technology. And that's
And,
another issue, Canada Post. I mean, get with it,
and
folks.
in any event, one of the issues that you have here is the battle between billionaires. For example, Warren Buffett owns a major railroad in the U.S., and the Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation are a major shareholder in CP Rail. So when they start talking about putting pipelines in, it's going to cut back on their oil business. And one of the problems that Canada had a couple of years ago is the federal government had to step in and tell the railroads that they were going to have to make room for the wheat exports on the rail cars because the railroads were booking up oil and gas exclusively, or to the exclusion of the wheat. So here's the issue. The Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation also promote a lot of environmental causes, and I'm in favor of environmental causes, but it becomes a direct conflict of interest because the pipeline is a direct competition to the railroad. So
Yeah.
you have a situation where there's a conflict of interest amongst industries, amongst billionaires, amongst environmentalists, amongst people who want to work instead of sit around and do nothing, people who look at the economic activity as being the driving force in the Canadian economy. And you're looking at half a dozen people scattered along miles and miles of wilderness who are saying, not in my backyard. And when you look at pipelines, they are by far the safest way to ship oil. So what you need to do is decide, do you want to be in the oil industry at all?
To me, the
Or do you
easiest business, once the oil starts flowing, it's just maintenance. The oil flows 100,000 barrels a day that you charge $10 to $18 a barrel. That's more revenue than you make on royalty, folks. It's a large revenue for tax pocket. Like your tax dollar will be lower if we make profit off shipping oil and gas east or west. We don't make it going south because the pipelines are owned by private corporations. They make the profits, and they love dumb people that don't realize that. What would you rather have? Higher taxes and let the wealthy steal your money, or lower your taxes and get more services and more bang for your buck? That's up to you folks. And
here's
put pressure
here,
on Ottawa. They've been given a proposal to have crown corporations restructure all of Canada, which of course is the old national energy program, folks, and foreign influence pushed that away, and we lost as a result of that disappearing. And Norway started their program before the national energy program was set up, and they are very profitable now. Look at what we lost. And the national energy program was gaslighted by foreign interests and taking our profits out of the country. And you wonder why the teachers are on strike in Alberta. No resources to buy student supplies, their unfair wages. Hell, Alberta now is the lowest minimum wage in the country because wealthy people don't want to pay you for your services, folks, and they own the politicians. So our political system is wrong for the times as well, where money buys politicians to get elected because they owe favors to the wealthy. And the wealthy tell them what we're going to have for legislation and services. So there's my rant. But problems are
well
easy to solve.
here's a solution. Canada has signed up for Donald Trump's demand that all these countries in NATO increase their defense spending to 5% of the gross national produce. So here's what I think we should do: is we should declare energy self-sufficiency in the national interest, and any
Oh,
money that we
absolutely.
spend in upgrading our ability to export oil and gas should be part of our defense spending budget. And
Well,
why
all our
spend?
all our jets and all our tanks and all our officers that got to drive around in parades, they need to have oil and gas to run those vehicles and run those jets. So yeah, that would be a
No,
great
no, but
expenditure.
don't buy the damn jets. Like what do we
No,
need
no,
80
but we
million?
we can we can claim it as legitimate war surplus, building a stockpile of refining capability for supplying fuel to the war cause if one was to happen. I'm
No,
not
no,
an
Corey, it's
advocate of
even
war,
more
but
practical. It's more practical than that. We're assisting the world to get away from Russian oil.
oh, there
So
you go, perfect.
we can't do that unless we can get the oil to the ocean to export it. So we're helping the Ukraine.
But
We're assisting NATO.
I don't like the idea of shipping our raw product to coastal waters or anywhere, actually. We should be refining here and shipping higher quality end products that make more profits and steady workforce here. And that can cut our production down because we only have a finite supply of oil. And if we don't look past our noses, we're going to run out of the easy to produce oil. And that's going to be a problem 20 years from now. Everybody's going to bitch that the cost to produce oil has gone up because it's all the easy oil has been shipped out for no profit and to the taxpayer. So we have to start planning smart. We have maybe what 100-year supply of oil at current production on a parabolic production curve. We can't be doing oil forever. There's a finite resource, and we have to control the production of oil and mitigate the environmental damages from production by limiting how much oil is produced and increasing the profits to the local taxpayer as much as possible during that time of extraction where we do have the resources easy to get at. When the cost to extract oil goes up, we're going to be having to subsidize the oil companies even more than we're doing now under the model we're using. So that's not a viable model, folks. We have to sit down and what we need is a national energy model think tank that goes into developing a strategy that is best for Canada and not the best for the wealthy that are taking the proceeds out of Canada. And that's something Carney should set up. And in that model, he should also realize that BC or any province which has a pipeline or refining proposal receives a revenue from that. So we need to set up a royalty system where oil and gas going across other provinces collects a royalty as if from the source to help future environmental damages caused by such. And that can be all set up through taxes and or royalty schemes that are beneficial to those provinces. Ebby wouldn't have a problem if he was getting $10 a barrel of oil going through his province to lower his taxes and burden on the people of BC, and it would also have a fund set up for cleaning up any environmental catastrophes. That can all be set up through a think tank, and I would love to see that think tank set up. Carney, why aren't you doing it? It's very simple. There are people like myself, Cal there, we all understand oil and gas. We can put positive input into a plan that works for Canada 50 years from now. You're only thinking of the here and the now and keeping and controlling power in politics. That's what Smith's thinking of doing, keeping power and control in politics. We're not thinking 50 years out. We need a long-term plan for a finite resource that does run out eventually. And that we have to plan for. So, yeah.
Well, I also find it rich that, BC is cutting, old growth forests
Yeah.
along the coast, trees that have been there for 400 to 600 years that won't come back probably ever due to global warming, has, the gall to, lecture other provinces with respect to the utilization of their resources. So it's a major issue in Canada that won't get resolved. I don't think you can negotiate your way through this one. I think somebody has to step up and say one way or the other, we're going to do it or we're not going to do it. And that's going to be the
Well, the
federal government.
voters are the bottom line. If the voters want higher taxes, keep the model we're using. If you want lower taxes, start thinking outside the box and putting pressure on your politicians to support better models for development of Canada as a whole. When our oil is transmitted to BC, BC should be getting some financial benefit from that oil. The only people that are getting a reduced price on that oil are the oil companies. They're not paying their fair share. So Alberta allows that, and that's not right. So the federal government and other provinces need to step up and control the prices and whether revenue is being redistributed for future use or environmental concern. So there is a lot of things that aren't being done in the oil and gas industry, and it just befuddled me that this is happening. I can't understand why we are so ignorant and gaslighted and allowing such blatant disregard for a finite resource and willingly giving the money away free and willingly paying hundreds of billions for cleaning up the mess. I mean, listen, folks, there's a drilling incentive program where some wells are incentivized by the government to drill them. That means they're given a tax royalty, don't have to pay any of the royalty until they recover the cost of drilling. So the first 2 years, all the revenue that could have gone to the government goes to the oil company to pay the cost. So if it's $1 million well, they get to absorb the royalty holiday for $1 million. They don't pay that royalty. So the well was free. And then guess what? They get to make profit and pay a royalty. But the royalty is lower than what Alaska pays or other countries in the world receive for their oil. And at the end, guess what? The well is abandoned. And guess who's paying for the cleanup? You are. You're paying for it. So you paid for the cost of drilling. You got a little bit of revenue to off the well when it's already in declining production, because the first 2 years are when the wells produce. After that, it's slower production and more costly production. And then at the end, you're paying for the abandoned well costs and the cleanup to the environment. So you're the sucker. And that's bottom line. That incentive program puts the taxpayer as the sucker, and it rewards the individuals drilling the well and abandoning the well. That you can't allow, folks. And those are what's going on right today. And it has gone on since Peter Lougheed days. So you want to talk, we need a fair and equitable system, and we don't have that. But we can show that Norway's model worked very, very effectively. And yes, when Norway set it up, folks, the oil and gas industry bucked and balked and fought the government for setting it up. And guess what? After a year or 2 years, the oil companies came back because it's still profitable for them. They still made large amounts of money, and they tried to influence the politicians, and they failed. So you have to have a little kahunas here in Canada, and yes, the oil companies are going to put extraordinary pressure on politicians to back down from setting up a Norway model. But you, the voters, should be stepping up and saying, no, that's what we want. We deserve that. We deserve to have the rewards, not some rich, wealthy person or foreign owners. We, the Canadians, deserve that. And you have to step up and demand that. If you don't demand that, bend over and get it right up the wazoo, because that's all we've been getting, folks. There's my rant for that for a bit.
Well, to put BC's issue with respect to tree cutting into some kind of perspective, the city of Vancouver is approximately 44 and a half square miles. Every year, the amount of wood that's cut on Crown land in British Columbia is 926.6 square miles. So you look at the square miles of forest that's being chopped down every year in British Columbia and compare it to something like the size of Vancouver, you get an idea that they're cutting down trees at a phenomenal rate in BC.
But
And
you gotta look at it too. It is a renewable resource. Trees do grow back, and they do have a planting program. And if you don't harvest some of the old growth forest, you create fire hazards. And guess what? They have a lot of fires. And especially with global warming, there's more and more
Corey,
fires.
there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of
Yes.
fires in northern Alberta and Saskatchewan as well. But what the point I'm trying to make is, if you're talking about preserving the environment, perhaps you should look at your own province before you start telling Alberta what they need to do to for their environment. And otherwise
Well,
too, your concept with respect to a national energy program should include a calculation for Quebec's hydropower.
well,
And
yeah,
if because hydro is energy as well. And what
yeah.
you'll find is that Quebec does not include its generation of electricity in calculating the transfer funds between provinces. And you'll find that if they did, it would be a have province. And there's a lot of reasons why Alberta isn't happy with the way things are going, which gets me back to the Smith Dog and Pony Show. I
Well,
think she's setting up Carney for a talking point. Carney is going to say no. He's going to say no because BC won't allow it. No because he wants to make the environmentalists in Toronto happy. He
well,
has other he has other projects in other places in Canada, and Alberta will have another burr under its ass to complain about separation. And I
well,
think it's a political
the
stunt.
problem is there's no oil company stepping up to say we're going to build a pipeline, and that's because Smith is throwing the fuel on the fire, saying, "Hey, it's a bad time to invest in Alberta because we're in a separatist mode where we are going to balk at anything being done, and we might separate, really kill the economy out here." And that means investors are running from the province. We have the highest unemployment in the country in Alberta, and we have the lowest minimum wage in the country in Alberta, and we have a separatist movement going on that only represents 10% of the population in Alberta from what I'm reading and people I'm talking to. I don't want to separate. I refuse to separate. But we have treason being promoted. And last I checked, treason was against the law. So maybe, people should be considering that point. But the real issue is, in all this smoke and mirrors, it's us, the taxpayers, that are getting ripped off for our resources. And the more that they get ripped off, more it ensures that conservatives run the province and the assets for their wealthy benefactors. I mean, let's face it, the media out here is controlled by the wealthy. The wealthy determine who's going to be getting prime coverage in the news. The wealthy determine who gets the funds to run in politics. And basically, people, we're no different in the US. The oligarchs are telling you what you're getting for your politicians. And guess what? The politicians are doing everything to make sure you, the taxpayer, pay the price for these wealthy people. And that's not right. And we are a socialist country, and we need to start modeling more like European countries. The Nordic countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, they all have much better standards of living than Alberta, for sure. I mean, free education, the oil that's coming out of the ground instead of feeding these wealthy should be free education. I mean, free university as well, folks, and we can afford it. But if you have mismanagement and morons running your province, guess what? You pay the taxes, and your taxes keep going up and up and up. And folks, it's a voters' problem. It's a voters' issue, and they continue to be dumbasses at the voting poll.
Corey,
Can't help it.
this pipeline proposal is a red herring. In
Oh,
other words, no business in their right mind would even start studying the investment of billions of dollars when all of the other proposals have failed. Even the
yeah.
one going down to the US has failed. The Alberta government has lost billions of dollars on the Keystone pipeline. The Alberta government lost billions of dollars canceling their contract on rail cars. The
Well, let
federal
me
government
explain
had
it for you,
had no,
folks.
but hang on, let me finish. And the federal government had to step in to do the pipeline to Vancouver, and it went billions of dollars cost overrun. So everybody knows that this idea is a non-starter. What it is, it's a political talking point to try to get more out of Ottawa based on this jigging up the separatist movement.
Well,
That's really what it is.
let me explain what really is going on in Alberta from a point of view that few people understand. Texas is the only place our oil goes to refining predominantly. There are other pipelines to the U.S., but the oil refineries in the U.S. can only handle so much heavy oil. With heavy oil refinement, there is cake that is produced that has to be disposed of. There are competition from Mexican heavy oil and Venezuela heavy oil going to these refineries. There's only a limited capacity to refine heavy oil, and they do not have the ability to really expand their refining capacity. So when they were talking twinning the pipeline, what they were telling the governments was that by twinning the pipeline, we're going to double production or more to a finite refining process in Texas. And what was going to happen was that the price paid for our oil was going to be reduced due to oversupply, which means we were going to get half of what we're getting now, which is way below fair market value. When Obama was in power, he put a stop to that. He said, no, we're not allowing you to twin that pipeline. Then Trump came along and said, no, we'll twin it, because you got to understand, Trump's a profiteer. He's a capitalist. He wants to rip anybody off he can. If they twin the pipeline to Texas, we would get 25 cents on the dollar for our oil. They would clean it up down there. They'd make room for it, bump the Mexican heavy oil, Venezuelan heavy oil, make room for the capacity, and make huge profits off our oil that we don't get any tax dollars off of. And we would get ripped off, and that's the capitalist way, my friend. They want to make all the profits, and the lowest tax possible would be doing it that way in Texas. Now, Canada is notoriously known as the lowest taxation region for oil in the world, meaning that as an oil producing region, we tax the least amount for our oil. And when Ed Stelmach, and he was one of our best premiers in a long time, and I actually voted for him, folks, so you can't say I'm not conservative. I vote for whoever's the smartest guy going into the political arena. Since we have an elected dictatorship, when a premier is elected, that person runs the government. Ed Stelmach said he wanted to get more for our oil. He wanted to get the same equivalent price as what Alaska was getting, folks. And Alaska got quite a bit of money for their oil. And that's something that people don't seem to realize, is that we should have modeled like that. But what happened was the oil industry, the wealthy, blocked Stelmach and forced him out of his premiership because they did not want to pay their fair share for the oils that we produced. And that's what happens when you buck the wealthy in Alberta, because they own the politicians and they control the party. So there's, a lot to be said that Stelmach was punted from politics because he said, we want to get our fair share that Alaska is getting for their oil. And the U.S. companies did not want to pay that out to our government. And that, folks, is why we need to go and do the model of Norway, because Norway even returns more to their citizens than Alaska gets. Alaska gets a check for each Alaskan every year, gets a royalty check directly to their bank account. We don't get that in Alberta. We did get Ralph bucks, which were given out during the middle of an election to ensure that he wasn't defeated by Decor, and Decor was ahead in the polls, so out came Ralph bucks, $400 or $500 in the middle of an election to sway and influence your vote, and it worked. The Conservatives have been in power ever since. And that, in most democratic countries, is called buying votes. Not in Alberta. You can buy votes with your oil revenues all you want. So now we have a problem. How do we solve that problem? Well, we have to model after Norway. And folks, it worked. It is working. And anybody define that it doesn't work, bullshit. Capitalists are not anything but stealing our resources and our revenue and increasing our taxes as a result. Any input on Norway there, Cal?
One major difference is they're surrounded by water, which means that they don't need to go to a third party country in order to export their products, and that makes Canada a little unique. I mean, we got three coasts, and we're hamstrung as to what we can or cannot do, you know, to get products to market. But
But that's
again,
the
Canada.
federal government. That's them not stepping up to the plate. And the federal government needs to step up to the plate. Any oil or gas leaving any province, whether leaving the country or across another province, has to have a tax applied or a royalty applied to that product leaving, controlled by the federal government, to be dispersed to the province or that the pipeline or product is flowing across. So in the case of BC, BC has to be compensated, and Alberta has to pay for that or allow that, and the federal government has to regulate that. That's why crown corporations work, because Alberta could own a third of it, the federal government a third, and BC a third of the crown corporation making the money. That lowers the tax burden on taxpayers in BC, Alberta, and federally. So there are solutions, folks. You just have to model after Norway and add to our dynamics that provinces contend that they have absolute control of the resources. Well, folks, the pollution from Alberta goes everywhere. The winds blow east, it goes to even BC. If the winds blow west predominantly, it all goes to the east. So Ottawa gets our pollution, and our products produce pollution. So that pollution has to be compensated for, and the federal government has the right to start collecting royalty and taxes on those products that affect the entire country. And it affects the world as well, polluting. So we cannot allow one province to say, oh, we're in absolute control of our resources and we'll determine the price and we'll set the price. No, the federal government has to step in and say, we're setting the price of the oil. There's none of this giveaway and political influence from outside wealthy people to get our resources, whether provincially or federally, at a discount. And the federal government also owns oil rights in crown lands, and they have to control that, the price that they get for the royalties on that as well. So we do federally get revenue from oil production on crown land owned by the government. And we need to set up a better model for all this so that we get the benefit. We should be the Saudi of North America. Alberta and Canada should benefit from our resources. Right now, we are being ripped off of our resources. And that is because of politicians that are screwing us over.
Corey, I'm prepared to bet that Smith's plan's going no place. And this is just a way to crank up the federal government. The Alberta taxpayer is going to pay for a study that will enrich the people who do these studies.
Well, yeah,
And
that's
everybody knows it's going nowhere. Now, one thing that
well,
you
these
need
studies,
to,
like you said, were already paid for and done. There's nothing really changed except the technology has got better. We have monitors in pipelines that are state of the art now. We can detect leaks quicker and sooner. So the technology has increased. Our understanding of pipeline technology has increased. And the studies were done since the 50s.
something to be considered as well, though, when you look at Trump's tariffs, they didn't put a tariff on oil from Canada, and that's because they want it, right?
They also
So
get
if,
it at a huge discount. They didn't want
of
to make a
course,
red herring of it, because if they put a tariff on our oil, it would have raised the issue. How come you're getting our oil at, 15 to 30% discount already, and now you're putting a tariff on it? They don't want that brought up, that we're getting screwed out of our resources.
what it does is it shows you that if you put an export tax on the oil and took some of the distance out between the world price and the Canadian price, that's the only way to get back at the Americans for their tariffs.
And that should be put in. And that's what I also said to Carney, is that you need to do that. And these are strategic negotiations that you can implement tomorrow. You don't have to do a whole big study on, we need to set the price of oil. Norway sets their price. They have a pricing system that's set up the Petroleum Price Council is what they call it. It sets a norm prices, and which it does after collecting information from the companies and holding meetings with them. The norm price system applies to various types and qualities of petroleum. For gas, the actual sales prices are used. So they have a Petroleum Price Council set federally that controls the price that they're receiving for their royalties and income to the state. So why isn't that being done? Why isn't the federal government stepping in and saying, hey, enough of this gaslighting that and giving away of our federal resources and provincial resources? That has to stop, folks. That's the least you can do to start the discussions on fair and equitable trade in our non-renewable resources.
Corey, have you tried phoning Carney's offices?
Oh yeah, I'd be sitting on the phone. That'd be worse than trying to tell us to get proper internet connections. I've already sat on the phone for 3-4 hours so we get the podcast going. I do that weekly. So no, thank you. It's my phone number. You got it. It's in an email to you. I've sent 6 emails to Ottawa, to Carney, to the Minister of Energy, and not one, thank you. You know, it isn't like we don't have experience in oil and gas and can be great consultants. We both have a diverse background in oil and gas. I've been in it since I was 17 years old. When I wasn't even able to work in it, I lied about my age and worked in it. So guess what, folks? If you want insiders with the knowledge, you got to look at us. We're willing to stand up for you to lower your tax dollars, because at our age, we've been booted out and booted around by the best of them, and we lost in the oil and gas industry, unfortunately, and that affects you guys. So that's all I can say. But it doesn't mean we don't have the expertise. It doesn't mean we don't know what's really going on behind the closed doors. We do. We know what's going on, and we know we're going to be blacklisted. Oh, I already am blacklisted in the oil industry. I have been for many years. And that's because I tried to expose corruption in the oil and gas industry. And guess what? The only person that loses is me. Wrong. You lose too. Because they silence me so they can dig more money out of your pockets and laugh all the way to the bank. And they're laughing at you, folks. And rightly they should. So you have the opportunity now. Hit like, share, let people know, and make sure any comments you want to post, we'll answer them in the oil and gas industry. We're not hiding anything from you like a lot of people are, and we can deal with whatever comments you want. So share, make sure people know we're out here. You want to continue any more on this topic, or have another episode covering more of it? Because we can have 10 more episodes on this one.
I'm betting it's all smoke and mirrors and nothing's going to happen.
Well, that's the bet. There's no oil company stepping up. They've already said 3 oil companies, yeah, pay us, $14 million, and we'll do the research. It's already been done, so it's just refiling and updating the date on the report and send it in, and it's gravy money. I mean, they love it. It's feedback to the guys that are paying for the election of the politicians in the future. Graft is all that is. So yeah, nothing's happening, folks, other than Evie's going to get a talking point about environmental while he's cutting down trees and wrecking the environment in BC just as good as any other province is doing. They have oil and gas production in BC too, folks, and forestry mismanagement and fisheries mismanagement, and I could go on and on and on from an environmental point of view. So they're not perfect, and nor are they going to be perfect. It's run by capitalists who want to profit from the resources, and profits mean you're stuck with the bill, taxpayers, unless you use your voice at the voting box. What else can we discuss? What about it? The wrap?
Talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hey everybody, what is up? It is Joe King, your favorite host from Podcaster Comedy. Wanted to let you know about a new thing that we're starting out here under the Entertainment Talent umbrella. And you can learn more about this at Entertainment Talent on Patreon. We are starting the Supper Club because we like all things entertainment and all forms of entertainers, which we do interview on Podcaster Comedy. Not just comedians, but bands, musicians, artists, anybody who's doing cool and unique things in the arts and entertainment world. But we're bringing now the experience to you live at home as the fan. Make sure you come check out the Podcaster Comedy Supper Club, which is coming up soon. Or I guess we might even just name it the Entertainment Talent Supper Club, which will be coming up, where you can see live stand-up comedy, you can see live bands, you can cut a rug on the dance floor, as well as enjoy a fantastic meal. It's a great evening out. It's a great way to treat your significant other to some special quality time, have some fun, get to mingle with myself, with Paul Stauffer, with Cal Greedy, with Corey Lennerman in Ottawa, some of the famous people from Podcaster Comedy. You can join us, have a great time. So that's coming up soon. Make sure you check it out. We'll be notifying you when the next event happens and when it's happening in your town, so you can come and enjoy a supper club evening with us at the Entertainment Talent Supper Club. So make sure you check that out. Have a great day, and make sure you subscribe to the channel.